Gentlemen, we are live.
Thank you everyone for joining us tonight, and welcome back if you participated this last days with us here, and welcome those of you who are joining for the first time today. So my name is Giulio De Angeli. I serve as an executive director here at AFIA, and for those of you who don't know AFIA is a leading medical education group in Brazil, based on a number of medical school seats. We deliver educational solutions to empower students to be lifelong medical learners from the moment that they join us at our medical schools through their medical residency preparation, graduation program, and continuing medical education activities using a single technology platform. And we're here to discuss during this week the best practices from different countries and countries that are ahead of Brazil in terms of the pandemic spread. And in partnership with iHeed, a leading online medical education company based in Ireland, we put together a series of topics and panelists for this week. And that's our humble part of our contribution for our country during this COVID crisis. I wanted to mention first to all of you before we start that we have simultaneous translation. So there are two YouTube links, one for the discussion in English and the other one in Portuguese. So you can switch from each one of them. You can find the link for each other channel just below the video. And today is our last day, and it's been fascinating to hear the experiences from different professionals from around the world. A series of incredibly invaluable lessons for all of us who work in some way with healthcare. And today is a very, very important topic, and psychology and well-being of physicians, patients, and the population. Today here with us again, I have my dear co-hosts for this event. So Dr. Tom O'Callaghan, CEO and founder of iHeed, our partner company running this event. Thank you very much, Tom, for being here with us again. Dr. Rafael Munerato, cardiologist. He also serves as a board member at AFIA. And also I wanted to introduce our guests for tonight. We have three guests. So first of all, we have here Professor Kieran O'Boyle. He's the founding director of the Royal College of Surgeons of Ireland's Centre for Positive Psychology and Health, as well as a clinical and teaching roles. Kieran has been a consultant psychologist to national and international institutions. He's a leading voice in the areas of positive health, well-being, and fostering resilience in challenging times. Thank you, Professor, for being here. Professor Jun Kong Lee is a professor of family medicine at the Sungkyun Wonkwon University School of Medicine in Korea. Previously president of the World Association of Family Doctors, Asia Pacific region. He also has leadership roles in several institutions, including the Korean Medical Association and the Korean Society of Epidemiology. Thank you, Professor, for being here with us. And last but not least, Professor Alberto Arbex. He's a professor and researcher in endocrinology, public health, and obesity at AFIA in Brazil, accounting for 2,000 medical postgraduates. He has been a visiting scientist at Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health and has worked in Germany, whose management of COVID-19 has been widely praised. Thank you, all of our guests, for being here with us tonight. It's an honor to have you here for the last session of our series of webinars. And before we start, I wanted to show you all in advance a video that AFIA produced in honor of every healthcare professional in Brazil and beyond. And it's a humble tribute to each one of you saving lives out there. So let me just share my screen here. And this is our video.
E o Ministério da Saúde divulgou hoje pela primeira vez o número de pacientes recuperados da doença no Brasil.
Aos que atenderam o chamado, aos que saíram sem saber contra o que iriam lutar, aos que deixaram suas famílias em casa sem ao menos saber se vão voltar. Quando nós finalmente pudermos sair, quando o mundo lá fora for um novo lugar, é de vocês que nós vamos lembrar. A todos os médicos e profissionais de saúde que seguem cumprindo a sua missão, saibam que o mundo agradece e vibra por vocês. Porque vocês são aqueles que se entregam para nos salvar. Aqueles que lutam sem cessar, que continuam de pé. Não importa o quanto. Nessa batalha, nossos heróis vestem branco. A AFIA, em nome de toda a comunidade médica, agradece cada profissional de saúde que não hesitou em lutar essa guerra por nós.
So thank you for you all. You know, as you all do in UK, Tom, I wanted to, and in Ireland, you know, we've seen videos like this out there. So it's an honor to, you know, to be with you all here, but it's our humble tribute to each doctor and healthcare professional in the world. So Tom, I wanted to give you the word to kick off the discussions tonight. Thank you.
Obrigado, Julio. Boa noite, Brazil. I'm delighted to be here again tonight to support all our Brazilian colleagues across the country at this very difficult time. And I think there's nothing more important than tonight's discussion about how do we support the emotional and psychological needs of doctors at this very difficult time. We know that all doctors are under enormous personal strain right now, working excessive hours, wearing PPE, the suit of armor, as Saili from Singapore described it last night, working in very changing circumstances, worried about their own personal health, worried about their family's health, their children, their elderly parents, having to homeschool their children, worrying about the financial viability of their practices, worrying about how do they allocate precious resources in the hospital system or in their clinic, and worried about caring for patients who are dying, often without their families around them and without their families being able to say goodbye. So all of these things are very traumatic for us as a professional group. And I think tonight's discussion from Germany to Korea to Ireland will help all of us build some skills and share some experience of how best we can do that. Kieran O'Boyle is going to start the discussion. Kieran was the first professor of psychology when I was a medical student in RCSI in Dublin. He's always been a pioneer in physician wellness. So I hand over to you, Kieran, and look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom, and thank you, Julio. And first off, let me express our solidarity from Ireland to all of our colleagues in countries around the world who are suffering from the effects of this, this dreadful virus. Just let me share my screen here. So I want to speak fairly briefly about some of the key principles of stress and psychological well-being as they apply to health professionals, and particularly now in dealing with the virus. I think it's fair to say that we have two outbreaks. The first outbreak that we're dealing with is the outbreak of the virus, but we're also dealing with an outbreak of behavioral stress and strain. And as health professionals caring for COVID-19 patients, you are vulnerable not only to the risk of infection, but also to the impact of a variety of stressors that can result in mental health problems. The particular type of stressors depend on the phase of the pandemic. So the stresses on the upslope of the pandemic are different from those when the pandemic will be at its fullest, and different again from those once we're adjusting to the coming out of the pandemic. You'll see on the slides there are a lot of sources quoted here, and they will be available to you. But just to summarize the kinds of stressors as Tom has outlined there, well, working under extreme pressure, having to make extremely difficult decisions, deciding how to allocate scant resources to equally needy patients, providing care for all severely unwell patients, often with inadequate resources. I think working outside one's normal scope of practice can be a particular challenge. And then there's the risk of moral injury. And I'll say a little bit more about what that is in just a moment. And those are the work-related stressors, but there are also the human stresses of trying to balance one's own physical and mental health care needs with those of the needs of your patients, and aligning your duty to patients with your duties to family and to friends and to colleagues. So it's a complex series of stressors made worse by the uncertainty of the outbreak. One particular stressor I think that's worth noting is the risk of moral injury. And there's been a lot's been written about this just now. And this is the psychological distress that can result from actions or the lack of actions that violates someone's moral or ethical code. And lack of resources may sometimes put doctors, nurses, health professionals in situations where that can occur. And this can lead to feelings of anger, shame, guilt, disgust, and can result in depression, post-traumatic disorder, and even suicidal ideation. And I want to come back around to that at the end to say a little bit about what we need to do about that. But I want to just, put that up there very early on in this. So if we look across a wide range of literature on coping with disasters and coping with these kinds of challenge, we can really summarize, I think, the best approaches into these three major sorts of categories. The first is that it is essential that one's training, and preferably pre-disaster training, is designed to allow you to perform your job effectively and competently. If that is the case, and if you believe that your training is to a sufficient standard, you cope better in dealing with the disaster or with the challenge. I'll say more about each of these in a moment. There is no doubt that your resilience is enhanced significantly by support from family, by support from loved ones, but very particularly by support from colleagues and managers and from the broader staff within the hospital or within the clinic. And then the third is really a personal sort of strategy, which is based on adopting a proactive coping mindset. That is thinking about taking charge, engaging in proactive behaviors, accepting the situation and accepting the challenge. All of these are established as making us more resilient in facing crisis or in facing disasters. And I'll say a little bit more about each. When we come to looking at the personal approach that need to adopt in these situations, the concept of a mindset is extremely important. And a mindset basically is really it's a psychological lens. That's the easiest way of thinking about it. A psychological lens through which we simplify enormous quantities of information about the world and also about ourselves. And Carol Dweck in particular has written very beautifully about something called the growth mindset. And a growth mindset really looks at the way in which we relate to a challenge. When presented with a difficult challenge, we don't see the problem and start thinking immediately that we're failing, because we don't immediately get it and we have to learn to cope. But we start thinking that we're learning. And there's a lot of research to show that if we adopt a growth mindset and put extra time into learning why we failed, or from mistakes or rebounds or challenges, that really does help in dealing with the kinds of stressors that we're talking about tonight. So the mindset that one brings to bear in this situation is extremely important. And the kinds of things that I think are relevant here are, the kind of mindset which embraces challenges, that persists in the face of setbacks, that sees the effort as part of the journey, that's capable of learning from criticism, and that can find lessons and inspiration in the resilience of others. And I think particularly relevant here for clinical colleagues is the importance of tapping into the notion of your calling to be a doctor, your vocational calling to be a health practitioner. We have research evidence to show that those who are more aware of that vocational or calling aspect of their profession are less likely to suffer from burnout when faced with the challenges of delivering healthcare. The second element of this is that our resilience is enhanced by support, and that really does put the onus or the responsibility to a significant degree on the organization, in the organizations in which we work, to provide structures which provide support for staff. For example, Mount Sinai University hospitals and Hopkins hospitals have support teams, emotional support teams for health professionals. And one of the strategies they found very useful is to have a post-shift team huddle where people come together for a brief period and talk about the shift that has just finished. And many of you will be familiar, I think, with the concept, these wonderful concept of the Schwartz round, where that has been codified and structured to really provide tremendous emotional support. In the resources section of this presentation, I've provided some links to organizations that are really the world leaders on Schwartz rounds. And then the third element of this is really this proactive coping mindset. And here I'd like to recommend to you a course that's available through Stanford's Stress Center. And this is a really interesting new way of thinking about stress. Many of us, when we trained as psychologists, learned that stress was best avoided, or you did as much as possible to minimize stress. The Stanford approach really is a mindset change, where the thinking is now that we really should acknowledge our stress physiologically, emotionally, and behaviorally. So in other words, we're processing what's going on when we're under stress. And one of the advantages of this is it shifts processing from the emotional limbic system to the frontal cortex. So it changes the way in which we're processing the information. By taking ownership of our stress then and drilling down to see what the meaning of stress is for us, that's important in helping us deal with the situation. So I'm not just taking the stress as it appears to me immediately. I'm asking the question, what challenge this is creating for me, and why is it stressful? And then recognizing and using the energy inherent in the stress to move me towards my goals. Now, we're not saying that this is easy, but we're saying that it is a different mindset for approaching stress from the traditional mindset, which is that we're passive recipients and we simply have to accept the stressors as they're coming. I've said before, and I just want to reiterate this, there's some really good new research on this, that for clinicians, meaning and purpose in life are synergistic, and they can fuel sustained engagement with creativity, particularly when we're dealing with adversity. If a physician see a strong sense of calling, this is strongly associated with meaning in life and meaning in the workplace, and that's inversely associated with the risk of burnout. So finding meaning in work protects physicians and nurses from burnout. And there's nothing more meaningful at the current time than the saving of lives. The final area I want to just talk very briefly about is the risk of post-traumatic stress and the possibility of post-traumatic growth. I would highly recommend to everybody this website. It's based in Cincinnati. It's a not-for-profit organization. It's called Via Character. And it's very well researched. The scientists here are really top-class psychologists. I know them personally. Basically, you can go onto this site and you can assess your strengths. There are 24 signature strengths that humans have. You do a questionnaire here and it allows you to identify what your top 5 strengths are, what we call your signature strengths. And your signature strengths are the strengths that you have which really feel real to you. You feel excited when you discover them. If you're using them, you learn very quickly. You feel the strength as part of your core makeup. You want to find new ways of using the strength, and you feel energized and invigorated rather than exhausted when you use the strength. Now, a lot of military organizations are using some of this thinking in developing resilience in their troops and helping them to prepare for crisis situations. So I highly recommend that site. I think it really is excellent. If you identify your strengths, be aware of the strengths that you're using in dealing with the COVID challenge, use your personal strengths as much as you can. Be aware of others' complementary strengths that complement yours, particularly on the team. And then for managers and leaders, make room for your people to use their strengths because that feels right and they excel when they're using their strengths. We know that using our strengths is one of the best vaccines, if I could put it that way, for preventing subsequent psychological distress. There's quite a large literature now emerging, which I think is very positive, which basically is saying that stress and traumatic stress does not inevitably cause post-traumatic disorder. For many people who have to deal with traumatic situations, they find that their lives are actually changed, but in a positive way. They have a greater sense of meaning. They have a greater appreciation of their relationships and a great appreciation of their own lives. And we now know that by helping people to understand their response to trauma, by helping them to reduce anxiety, by engaging in constructive self-disclosure with a coach or a clinician, creating a narrative around what they've experienced, and then articulating their life, principles of life that have been enhanced by going through the trauma. These are strategies that can help reduce the risk of post-traumatic stress disorder. The risk is still there, but it increases the potential or the likelihood for post-traumatic growth. And I think in the current time, this is going to be extremely important. Finally, then, I want to come back to this notion of moral injury. The risk of moral injury, as we said, is increased when resources are limited. The prevention strategies are frank information and discussion by the team, particularly in advance of a situation arising or immediately afterwards, the use of the Schwartz rounds, strong supervisor and team supports, particularly for younger health professionals starting off their careers. And I've given the example of the post-shift huddle there. Regular contact to discuss ethically challenging decisions and regular check-ins on well-being. and then post-crisis monitoring and support, and then where necessary, because people will respond individually, putting in evidence-based treatments. I'm not going to go through this now because of time, but I'm going to put it there and people can read it. It's the really famous poem by William Ernest Henley that Nelson Mandela used to quote in Robben Island, and it is probably the best thing ever written in the humanities about adopting a resilient mindset in the face of crisis. So thank you very much for that, and I'll hand back, I think, over to Tom now.
Yeah, thanks, Kieran. Look, that's fantastic insights. And while Professor Alberto is organizing his slides there, I just like your thoughts on, obviously family is critical here. And, you know, what do we say to our children? You know, what do we say to our teenage children who are in their bedrooms on social media all day consuming this stuff? You know, how do we handle both of those groups who are critical in our families as healthcare professionals?
I think that's a really good question, Tom. I think the most important thing is that the communication and the information has to be age appropriate. You know, the 3 to 7 year olds cope very differently from 7 to 12 year olds, who cope very differently from, you know, 12 to 16 or 17 year olds. We've put some material on the RCSI website on this, on how to talk to children, and we can put those links up afterwards. My advice to people generally, I must say, is to significantly restrict the amount of news and information, and particularly social media, to which one is exposed, because as we all know, there's a great deal of misinformation out there. And you just see this driving anxiety. So the anxiety pandemic moves much faster than the virus pandemic. And I think it's fueled by this overconsumption of information, particularly for young children. I think it's important that parents monitor and manage the amount of information to which younger children are exposed. And the other thing I would say is adults need to be very careful about what they say when little ears are around, because they're always listening.
Sure, and that's why they pick up on the stresses of their parents. Alberto, we'll have more questions at the end, but maybe Alberto, would you like to take us through the German experience and tell us how Germany has managed so well in the face of the COVID crisis?
Surely, I'd love to. So I'll try to share my screen. I'd like, first of all, to thank for the invitation from Julio, from Tom, and from Rafael, and from Afia. I'm very glad to be here and to share with you this experience. I'll call this lecture the German Strategy on COVID-19. And it was a nice surprise when I was looking for more information. I saw at the first page of CNN.com today, Germany as the success story. So I'll try to explain to you what are the parts of this success story that has still not ended. It's going on. There's a lot to do. There's a lot to be done. But surely, when you see the mortality rates in Germany, they are very low. So we have really a good feeling that we are doing the right thing. And also, you see the decrease in new cases of COVID-19. You see from the 13th of March until today, we went from the peak of 6,000 cases to 4,000, 2,000, 1,000. And these days, for example, today or yesterday, we had around 600, 400 new cases. So we are not at the peak anymore. Many things that were done, they were effective in dealing with the epidemic or with the pandemic. So I think one of the key points in this is the leadership we have here. It's from Dr. Angela Merkel. That's the first new information I give to you. Possibly many of you do not know she has a PhD in quantum chemistry. So she's a scientist. In this way, when she said kind of a week ago, the hallmark of science is that you always make the latest findings transparent and clear. It was for us no surprise, because we are going the way that a leader tells us to go, and we feel safe this way because she's also a scientist. So the key words here are people here in Germany, they trust their governments. There are centrally structured measures and they are science-based. And there's a high adherence to the lockout. 90 to 95% of the population stayed at home. It was tested, and that's really like this. And the essential systems, they kept functional. So they thought on making all the system keep working. There was a crisis cabinet in Germany. They include already also philosophers in this crisis cabinet. It's really something extraordinary. And population was tested widely since January, 160,000 tests per week, up to 800,000 tests weekly. And the health system was contacting each case per phone. As they were positive, they called patients and told them, where are you? Where have you been? Your contacts. So they were kind of tracing officially the way the virus came in Germany. And they are experiencing crisis management. For example, the Prime Minister, Angela Merkel, in 2015, she had a very tough crisis to handle when the refugees were there. More than 2 million people came. And she said, yes, we can make it. And she gave the population again the feeling, it's possible, we can do it. And it's again the case. So, for example, early tracing of first cases in Germany since the end of January, it was possible to control the cases. Just a few positive cases were missed because when you treat early, we know we save lives. And I also was on the way to this. They told me there are some patients, they need vaccination against pneumonia. And then I went to their homes to vaccinate these people. And when patients called and said, I may possibly have the virus, I was in Italy, I was in China, I was in Iran, then the doctors, we went to their homes and we tested them. So it's an active prevention instead of just waiting for what's expected to come. It's a strong healthcare system and telemedicine is coming quickly. So this is a key scientist on virology, Professor Drosten, is the first professor who developed the corona test at the middle of January, and he donated it freely to all labs in the world. So we had the tests since January, and daily he was at the radio discussing things, important things like, are children at risk? Are masks effective? Is home isolation a good measure? Is school reopening the right thing to do now? The problem is we are dealing with an unknown disease profile. So there has to be daily reports, and we received it daily, delivered to doctors, health facilities, populations. All states decided together the next steps. They did not hesitate in adjusting measures. Germany received patients from France, from Netherlands, from Italy, and from Spain, because the hospitals were not full, because we had the full work. Everything was working fine. And then there was structured information, a careful approach, antibody testing, that's the next way, the next thing to do, 3 million tests just to start with it. There are 2 state-controlled media groups, and they said, no panic, we have the information, stay at home, and control of fake news through individuals. So what is to do now? Perspectives. First phase, check, it's done, but it's not over. That's what Angela Merkel said yesterday on TV. She said, a tracing app is the next step we have to do. And there was intense debate on privacy, on the individual information, because Germans, they hate data control. They want data decentralized, like no cloud, So they did not accept the Google system, the Apple system. They are inventing, creating a new system, decentralized, where the information is based only on the patient's cell phone and not at a central agency or computer that could control people's informations. And vaccine development, we are expecting this for fall, or maybe, I don't know, 6 months, 8 months development on it. So perspectives: tracing app, antibodies, vaccine. Second point, leaders must give a clear message. In the middle of a crisis, leadership matters, and science should be the key for decisions, not opinions. So the second information maybe you didn't know, Germany has also a president, not only a prime minister. And Steinmeier is the president of Germany. And he said something very interesting that I want to share with you. He said, this pandemic is a test of our humanity. It evokes the worst and the best in us. Let's show each other the best in us, which I agree the most. Thank you. I'm here for...
Thanks, Alberto. A wonderful short synopsis and case story of what the successes have been in Germany. And isn't that great leadership for, you know, what the president says, you know, it's really leading from the front. Professor Lee, you know, does much of that experience in Germany resonate with you? How do you think the Korean experience has been in comparison, or would you like to share some of your experience?
Yes, I think that's a very fantastic presentation from German experience. I will talk about some perspective of what lockdown meant in Korea and how the public reacted to the measure taken to contain the virus. And also I'd like to say about what the measure the health authorities made to boost morale and maintain hope in time of crisis. First, now in Korea situation, now is we are very lucky, and now we are at the end of the pandemic. I hope so, but yeah, accumulated number of infected people is now 10,800, and around now every day around 10 new cases identified for the last week. Yesterday is zero. So, but then most people came back from abroad. But we are worried about the silent transmission in the community and concern the possibility of a classed epidemic. It's because the route of transmission is not identified in around roughly 6% of the newly detected cases. So which imply the silent spread of COVID-19 now. But in Korea, actually the lockdown of whole city life actually are not enforced. Instead, the strong measure of social distancing and personal protection, such as mask wearing and hand washing something, and the individual distance of both arms apart, so about 2 meters, are very well emphasized. And the public transportation were operated during this pandemic, and stay at home is recommended, but not enforced. The business is doing by their own way. Some work from home, stay home, depending on their job description and infrastructure. So, but the museum and the public library or gymnasium are closed. Even our one city, Daegu City, is actually first epicenter of the epidemic, was not suffered from the lockdown like initial phase of Wuhan, China. This is actually a success story, even if we lost 255 lives, and we still have 1,000 more patients isolated or under treatment. But the hospitalization is very, very restricted because many well patients, you know, is under well care treatment centers, we call it, such as they reside in some dormitory and then not hospitalized. They are all, anyway, whole patients are now 1,000 more still we have yet. As of the day before yesterday, Wednesday, the strategy of a strong social distancing measure is a little relaxed. So we had been under a very strict social distancing measure for the last 6 weeks. So 2 weeks extended 3 times since late March. Now we change a little. Some public spaces are open. Schools now under homeschooling, online learning, are prepared for opening again. But all this is change inevitably makes us uncomfortable. So we hospital staffs decided to continue the strong measure of social distancing for further 2 weeks. So also Daegu City is our original epicenter, also announced to extend it. Anyhow, it's a way to go. Next, it's how the public reacted to the measure taken to contain the virus, and how their impact on their normal life. I think the public, the Korean public, endure the restricted activity in daily life. Endured actually. The public are well informed and cooperated well with the direction of the authority, government, or Korean CDC. Actually, the Korean has some lesson learning from the previous experience. As you might know, Korean people we had some epidemic of Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, MERS, in 2015, 5 years ago. So that resulted in 38 deaths, 186 patients, about, and 16,000 more people isolated. And they are normalized after about 6 times later for whole 6 months epidemic. During that time, economic was down and people were angry at the government control measure, and society was very confused. So that was very, very expensive lesson then. So actually in this case, in this pandemic, we already prepared for this new emergent infection. So many systems were getting to improve, and practical manual provided for the future epidemic. So in this case, when things were worse in this February, the authority of government was able to act quickly, and not only to mobilize the epidemiology manpower, but to make the PCR test kit and approve it quickly and do tests. So many tests can be done. And the next, finally, I want to talk about the what measure the health authorities made to boost morale and maintain hope in time of crisis. Already, previous presenter already discussed it. It's the same, yeah. Honest communication. Yeah. Every day, Korean CDC announced the number of new cases, death, accumulated number of infected people, isolated people, number of PCR tests. Every day they present it in the morning. So they also report a possible route of transmission of new cases, test detection and tracing, isolation and treatment. All these preventive measures are reported transparently every day. So they also announced a meticulous emphasis on personal protection repeatedly. And the kind of activity actually very reliable and make people believe that this authority is doing well. Also I liked some kind of use of information technology. when the pandemics were high, actually smartphone messages were booming many times a day. So educational one message, a tracing report of my community, which person went to which grocery or restaurant, etc. I did it well using many personal information, a credit card use, a transportation card, a location tracking of a smartphone. And this actually would concern a privacy problem, but it is legitimate in Korea, and the Korean public accept it in this phase of emergent pandemics. So some privacy problems still exist, and they are now recommended all the information in the website or some cloud computer is now or should be deleted for the last 1 month period. So they delete it now. So another one is very coordinated activity of governmental workers. They are very good. So when you are, for example, when you are self-quarantined for 2 weeks of incubation period, everyday report of health status is mandatory by telephone or smartphone applications. And during this homestay, all the daily necessity delivered, and it is free. So it's very huge activity of administration effort. So healthcare professionals and the government workers were so committed to this job. And so another one is already that O'Boy is described. The social support was huge. So we are now some movement for the healthcare professionals and volunteer activities, volunteers to appreciate their job. And so we use a sign language for your thanks you. It's a sign language for so many some now we opened a professional baseball league now, just opened, and day before they're starting the game, they use this sign language and to support our healthcare professionals and volunteers. That all is very good for the morale of healthcare professionals and therefore their resilience. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Lee, and it's great to hear all of those, strong leadership, good information, I suppose good community support, putting their arms around everybody. Had the experiences of the past built resilience in the doctors, and your experience of MERS in the past, and the fact Kieran spoke about it earlier on, the past training and past experiences would help build resilience. Did you find that Korean doctors were ready for this, and that they adopted the roles much more easily, or were able to do it?
I don't have exact data. I don't have exact data, but my personal experience is when the MERS epidemics arose in 5 years ago, we had some experience, and so very, we are very actually initially they are confused and exhausted, but finally we did it. So we did it. We succeeded. So that will be very helpful. And in this case, in this pandemic, first epicenter in Daegu City, their president of a local Doctors Association is announced in the broadcast to make every doctor in this country to help our city to come to volunteer the huge number of patient care. So at that time, many nurses and doctors are going to their city, and they are actually dispatched to each hospital. And it's that a huge impact, huge help for the community to survive and control and contain the virus. So that might be actually a calling,
Yes.
So calling, as already Dr. Boy has mentioned that this commitment and the calling of the healthcare professionals are so helpful in recover from this pandemic.
Yeah, and certainly we've heard that over the past few nights, that it's really built, that sense of people really understanding the importance of the role of the doctors in society has really strengthens people's belief in what they're doing and encourages and supports them. So kind of what key piece of advice would various people in the group, Alberto, what would you be saying to Brazilian doctors tonight, having lived through the German experience? What are the 3 or 4 things you'd be saying to your colleagues out there who are, right in the height of the storm, under all of that emotional strain and stress?
I was very touched by the speech of Professor Boyle when he said, hear the calling. Like we all, as doctors, we have this feeling, we have to be on the front. We have to help people. And when he was also speaking, he said, how to explain children about this? I tell my children every day, Papa is coming to take care of people. And when I give them this message, they get it and they understand how glad we doctors are that we can help people in our work. It's not in every work that it's so clear that we help people every day when they suffer, when they have difficulties in their daily life. It's a great feeling we all have. When I speak to my colleagues in Brazil, I see they persevere, they stay on their great difficult job, they try to help people, they are there despite all risks. We are all working towards a benefit for all the population, and we can feel it. And we doctors from Brazil, we have this feeling that we are ready to help, and we hear the calling, and we are there for this. It's like we've been waiting our whole life for a crisis to come, to be able to help people. So that's really our feeling from deep inside our hearts.
Yeah, and I think that's very true of my experience of Brazilian doctors, many of them whom I've met, is that such a strong sense of community, of support to the country and belief in your people. Rafael, would you like to say something?
Yeah, Tom, thank you very much. Was wonderful presentations. And I would love to discuss a little more about leadership, healthcare leadership, and especially how much we need better and more training in healthcare leadership, because I am one of the persons who believe that everything rises and falls in leadership. And when we say that stress is inevitable, but we have to better control our emotions, the resilience of our team, the growth mindset, everything relies on a better leader. And when Professor Alberto brought to our attention the Angela Merkel example, that reminds me that it's very important for us to create better healthcare leaders. So if you can say a little words about it.
Okay, it's a whole system. We are working as a whole for the society. So not only Angela Merkel, also the president, also the health ministry, also the head of the virology department, the head of the infectious diseases in Germany. It's called Robert Koch Institute. It's the Institute for Infectology in Germany. They're all working together. They can give society a feeling that we are all working together. Not only this, when we have scientific informations, people were discussing all around the country, how do we use these informations? Do we use it merely in a scientific way, or do we discuss with society? Because owners of restaurants, for example, or hairstylists, they were saying, oh, fine, we stay at home, but we have to get money. We need money to keep up with our families. So the state gave as a leadership like bonuses to these people to stay at home. And that's leadership speaking, talking, dealing, debating with the population. That's how leadership should be. Hearing, listening to people and then deciding together, not far away from people, not only with science, but as a society as a whole. That's
Perfect.
leadership.
And I mentioned also, Alberto, the role of the leadership within the hospitals, the physicians leaders, and they very important role in all of this stress control and better resilience of the teams.
Yeah. Kieran, I mean, you've worked for many years on building leadership in healthcare professionals. Would you like to say something about experiences you've seen and what you've seen recently in the pandemic in terms of true healthcare leadership? You're on silent there, you, Kieran. Kieran, you're on mute.
Thanks, Tom. Yes, we established in the RCSI in 2005 an Institute of Leadership, and I ran that for 15 years. And we put thousands of health professionals through that, developing their leadership. And there's a couple of key things here. I think we really do need in our medical schools to start thinking about this kind of training much, much earlier, because doctors by definition are team leaders, but we do very little development of leadership early on in clinical training. The second thing that I would say is that it's not really appropriate to ask individual clinicians and health practitioners to cope with stressors solely by working on themselves. The system is extremely important. Why should we train somebody to cope effectively with a toxic job? We should really be changing the toxic job. So there's leadership required, systematic leadership required to create positive organizations in which people can thrive and flourish. And then when we come specifically to the kind of leadership that's needed for clinicians, there's a type of leadership we call authentic leadership. And the components of that are self-awareness, self-knowledge, being a moral sense, a sense of integrity, a sense of compassion.
I think he's frozen there, has he? Yeah. While we're waiting, Professor Lee, would you like to say anything about this?
He's back.
Oh yeah, are you back, Kieran?
Yeah,
we lost you there for a second.
I think I dropped out. I'm not sure at what point, but
no, you're okay.
To finish on it, I think there's a lot of really interesting research evidence emerging now to show that compassionate leadership is incredibly effective, and it's not just effective in terms of employee engagement or in terms of organizational excellence. We're seeing now that it has a significant clinical impact. Now, clinically, that was always known, I think, anecdotally, but there's some good research evidence to show that compassionate leadership is really Michael West's work in the UK, for example. So I believe we should be starting to teach leadership, resilience, and so on in first year of medical school.
Yeah, Professor Lee, did you want to say anything about leadership before we open it to the floor more?
Yeah, asexual leadership is very important. Particularly, I think I want to emphasize the government authority to control the measure. Actually, hospital healthcare professionals actually treating the patients, but the preventive measure and all the investigation of tracing and all the testing or something of work done by the government officials and their volunteers. So how the administrators, how the administrations, government work effectively is matters. So it's not only done by the healthcare professional, but also, it's by the whole society. I agree with Dr. Alberto, Professor Alberto, yeah.
Yeah, I think the one thing I would say in an Irish context, what's been very strong has been where doctors have got into senior political positions and have been able to show strong leadership. In Ireland, our Prime Minister is a doctor, and that's helped us. I think that's been helpful. Julio, have you anything you'd like to add here, or any question you'd like to bring?
Yeah, there are a couple of questions coming in here, but again, I always try to come back to the purpose and objective of this is, you know, we're learning so much with the experiences from the other countries. You know, Germany, great success case so far. You know, Korea, we heard Singapore, we heard about Taiwan. And my question is, what are the mistakes that, you know, our doctors here in Brazil, they should avoid, you know, from the experience in your countries? I think it's quite important. I would go for Professor Lee first, and then Alberto, if you could, right after that, because we are, you know, 3, 4, 5 weeks behind, and you know, we still have time to avoid a couple of these mistakes. So I wanted to hear from you. If you wanna go first, Professor Lee.
Actually, it's the country by country is a different healthcare system, and you know, infrastructure of social society. But when we in this case, actually the barrier should be avoided. You know, barrier to test, a barrier to get some treatment, or barrier to visit physician, or some screening center for test. So that is all done by the universal healthcare. So actually, the success story of Taiwan, Singapore, or Korea, or is also Germany. I think all the society has a very strong system of universal healthcare. That is very important in this pandemic period. So people can get to test, and every time they want to need. There's no financial barrier, no distance barrier, no transportation barrier. So all should be, as you know, provided by the healthcare, you know, system. So in Korea also, we have the universal healthcare system, and if you have some symptoms and you suspicious about COVID-19, you can call the emergency, you know, some is a presenting number, and then they even, you know, provide their transportation to the test facility if you don't have your car. So because you should avoid public transportation in that case. So those kind of activities are well done to contain in this virus.
Yeah, I mean, there's a point in, you know, a question come in there just saying that I suppose the culture of discipline and organization in some of the Asian countries like Korea and Singapore and Taiwan may have helped also. Professor Lee, would you feel that's true?
Culturally, so yeah. Culture is a very representative culture. I think so. Is mask wearing. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So mask wearing is very controversial issue, but in this pandemic area, you also be a potential spreader of transmission. So if you wear mask, if you are not, you know, at the patients, but if you wear a mask, everybody, you know, are not reluctant to wear mask. So everyone can wear mask. If you only one mask wearer, it's very problematic. But you wear mask and the neighbors all wear mask to prevent, you know, your potential spread. So we always wear mask, even if I'm not sick, because I can be a potential spreader. Because you know, now COVID-19 is transmitted even if you have an asymptomatic period. So it's very important. So even now a study showed, you know, that 2 days before the symptom develop, you can transmit the virus. So I think mask wearing is not substantiated by the actual very extensive studies, but in this case, I agree with mask wearing in everybody.
Yeah, there's a great sense
culturally
of civic responsibility.
In this, fortunately, we are culturally well accepted in many Asian countries. We're accepted that, so that's fortunate.
Alberto, Professor Alberto, you wanna move with?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
I want to add two quick things. The first of all, message to Brazilian doctors, not to fight against the system and say, I don't have enough equipment, I don't have enough protection. This is happening all around the world. So in the best countries where there's a lot of money to buy things, there's a lack of those equipments, masks, special masks. Every doctor in America, they're saying, we need more masks. We have to work with what we have, and then we can help people, we can help our countries. That's the first message. And the second message, important message, also as an answer to Rafael, is that at AFIA, every day at the classroom, when we teach our colleagues, we say, you have now the information. Now it's your duty to pass it away, to give it to other doctors. So you gotta work as a leader, not only as a doctor who gather more and more information, and then you go to your consultory and then you have your patients. No, you have to go to the radio, you go to the TV, and give the information to the population. So it's doctors working as empowered and as leaders. So that's what we do in everyday basis. And that's what we believe in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a fantastic statement. Any question, Raphael? Sorry, Kieran.
Say, Tom, just to Julio's point, while Ireland has dealt well with this overall in terms of the government's managing of this, we've a chief medical officer who really is excellent, and then the Prime Minister, being a doctor, I think has helped. I think one of the mistakes we did make was, given the increased risk of elderly populations, that we weren't sufficiently aware of the risks in our nursing homes for elderly people. We should have paid more attention, I think, to that as a particularly vulnerable group. So a lot of the deaths that we have had here have been deaths of elderly people in nursing homes. And I think that's something we would do differently if we were to do it again.
Yeah, I think so, because they're the most vulnerable. I mean, 50% of the people who've died from COVID in Ireland have been people in long-term care facilities and over the age of 80. So I mean, that's been, that experience has been borne out, I know, in other countries. I suppose we're getting close to the last few minutes, but I suppose we'd really like to know what pearls of advice, speaking to individual doctors out there, would people like to give? Maybe starting with you, Professor Lee, before we finish up, speaking to individual doctors out there, what would you like to say to them tonight? What positive thoughts would you like to leave them with?
It's very a privilege to take part in this meeting, and I told to my Brazilian audience and colleagues. Actually, Brazilian is a very huge country, and you are very strong tradition of community health, and I hope you can be done. You can do that, and that possibly and hopefully to cover from this pandemic, and we'll see you again in the very healthy state. Yeah.
And Raphael, what would you like to say to your colleagues?
Yes, Tom, yesterday we talked about the power of artificial intelligence and technology, and today we talk about the power of the emotional intelligence. So this is one of the fantastic way for us to discuss in our last team.
Yeah, I agree. And it's, are you, Kieran, are you optimistic for the future? What would you be saying to our Brazilian colleagues about how they get through this?
I'm full of admiration for frontline health professionals. I think all of us are. my sense of it is there's always a double pandemic. There's the viral pandemic, but there's also the psychological pandemic. And I would say, just as we need PPE for personal physical protection, I think we need a set of psychological skills for the protection of our mental health. So I would say to people, you know, not to sacrifice themselves, to monitor their own health and well-being. A burnt out doctor is no good to himself, to his family or herself or family, or to patients. So it's incredibly important that doctors look after their own health, and particularly their mental health. I think it's not just for individuals, it's for the organizations within which doctors work, the leadership in those organizations, to ensure that at the same time as they're treating patients, they're also looking after the health and well-being of the frontline workers.
Yeah, no, thanks, Kieran. And last night it came up that this is a marathon, not a sprint.
Yes.
And that people need to, you know, monitor their sleep, get plenty of exercise, eat well, hydrate well. And I think what came out clearly in your presentation was just how important it is to be part of that social unit, and you know, to take solace with your family and your friends, and the emotional support of your colleagues, and to be part of a team, and I suppose, and to focus on the now and not to look too far into the future, and to the things that you have the ability to control yourself.
Yeah, I think, Tom,
Alberto, would you have any final thoughts? Sorry, Kieran.
Yeah, 2 quick points. Okay. Quick. First of all, I'm honored to represent Brazil and to represent AFIA at this online symposium. And I would like to tell my Brazilian colleagues, stay safe, stay healthy. That's the most important information I have to give you. That's what I have to do. Professor Boyle.
Yeah. Kieran, sorry, you were going to say something else?
Just one quick final point. There's a great deal that's negative in this whole experience, but it does seem to me that there are some positive, what I would call existential positives in this. It certainly has reminded us of the importance of community, of society. And one of my hopes for this is, when we come out of this, that, you know, we'll have a better understanding that really bad things can happen at a global scale, and we may be more sensitive to climate change. That's one of the things I hope for, that we will be more sensitive, because that's also looming there in the background.
I think so. And what's very clear is, you know, there is huge global solidarity amongst the global medical family to support each other, and I think that community is very strong, and I think that gives support to everybody. You know, so I would be saying the same thing. I'd be saying boa noche and fique seguro to our Brazilian doctor friends. And I'd like to hand over to Julio to finish up, as it was his idea to hold this series. So Julio, what are your parting comments to all of our Brazilian friends tonight?
Yeah, again, I wanted to thank you all for being with us tonight. I agree with what Rafael mentioned. It's great that we had the opportunity to discuss the crisis in different ways, and I wanted to again to bring up you know, the solidarity aspect of all of this crisis. We're gonna get, you know, out of this stronger, more united. You know, the global aspect of integrating countries and sharing experiences we are doing here. I think this will be mainstream in the future. So, you know, the collaboration aspect of everything that we've been learning here, this is for me incredibly powerful for you know, for society evolving from now on. And I mean, it is hard to say that we learn in the hard way, right? You know, we see, you know, countries that suffered prior to this crisis with SARS, with H1N1, how they reacted faster. You know, the population was better, you know, advised. They understood better the whole thing, and different from us here. So again, it's a lesson, but again, I truly believe, you know, in the same way, I'm very optimistic that, you know, things will change, right? As we all say, the normal won't be, it'll be the new normal. But I think as a global community, more united. So, you know, thank you very much. So I wanted to hear your words as well, Tom. You know, we've been, you know, a great partner during this whole thing.
Yeah, just to say, buona noche, figue seguro. It's my best Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese, and my daughter, she made me a little badge. If you can read it, it says, "We love Brazilian doctors." So tonight, so we're with you all in spirit, and we're with you. Ireland sends its best wishes, and we know we'll see everybody on the other side. So stay safe. Thank you.
Yeah, and to finalize,
thank you very much.
I wanted to thank also all the
Thank you very
staff
much.
behind. Sorry, I forgot that. Very important. Our staff, our translators, you know, who did a tremendous job behind the scenes. You know, the whole AFIA tech team who put together, you know, the marketing team on the back, you know, and you know, our professors, our faculty, our staff who participated. You know, it's a huge honor to be part of all of this. Thank you very much, and hope to run another event of like this one very soon again. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.